contain spoilers for Undertale and Deltarune.
Be sure you have played both before watching.
Until then, we will remain here.
Waiting for you.
Welcome back to LoreFactsTV, where we have another Deltarune video for you. The support on our first couple Deltarune videos has been overwhelming, and we really appreciate all the kind comments and insightful discussion from everyone, so thank you so much for tuning in. I think we all knew it was only a matter of time before we talked about Gaster, and today is the day we finally break our silence and talk about every theorist's favorite mystery man. The mystery of Dr. W.D. Gaster is one that has plagued my mind on a regular basis since becoming involved in the Undertale community many years ago. And with the release of Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 bringing a plethora of new Gaster tidbits, there has never been a better time to dive in. First off, I have to address the new voice. I'm Ben, a writer and editor for the channel, and I'm filling in for the voiceover on this video. It probably won't be too frequent, but I may pop up every now and then to voice a video. With introductions out of the way, let's jump into it. We had this video planned in the production pipeline for a while, but recently there's been a lot of back and forth on his importance to Deltarune and its story in the community. With the release of Chapters 3 and 4, I think it's almost been like an information overload, with all of the new info and context overshadowing some of the reasoning behind why we once thought Gaster to be so important. It's understandable why people have lost sight of some of these threads in response to so much actual tangible plot, but I firmly believe there has never been a better time to discuss Gaster, and that he has never had a more active role in the story. This video will be a little different from our standard theory videos, and will act as more of a compilation of factual information rather than speculation. Seeing as Undertale is turning 10 years old this year, there are many new fans to the games of Toby Fox who weren't around when the mystery of Gaster was first unraveling, and they may not even be familiar with who he is. Due to his hidden and secretive nature, if you were to play through all of Undertale and Deltarune with zero interaction with the larger community, you likely wouldn't even hear mention of Gaster. We want this video to serve as an introduction to who Gaster is and everything we can piece together about him from both Undertale and the first 4 chapters of Deltarune, as well as a compendium of sorts for every Gaster appearance. After that, we will spend some time talking about why I think Gaster is an integral part of the overarching narrative of Deltarune. If you're already a Gaster expert and just want to hear this part of the video, the timestamp will be on screen. Or if you want to explore specific parts of Undertale or a Deltarune chapter, there will be chapters in the video you can skip to. With all that out of the way, let's start at the beginning and dive right back into Undertale. As I mentioned previously, if you were to play Undertale in a vacuum, it's highly likely that you would not see or even hear any mention of Gaster. This is because everything we can find about him is hidden throughout the game in vague references or locked behind heavily RNG-dependent encounters. Every time you start a game of Undertale, your save file is assigned a random number between 0 and 100 called a fun value. Each fun value you can be assigned corresponds to a unique event that will occur at various points throughout the game. Most of these are tiny, inconsequential changes such as adding a word to Sans' word search or getting a special phone call from one of the characters. However, some of these events instead introduce us to a mysterious character known as W.D. Gaster. 3 of these fun values will cause a grayscale NPC to appear in various places throughout the game that when spoken to will give some ominous dialogue. The fun values 61, 62, and 63 will spawn NPCs near some of the Hotland elevators. These NPCs are labeled as G_follower internally, leading most people to refer to these 3 NPCs as the Gaster followers. Firstly, fun value 61 will give a 20% chance of a version of the NPC found at the Spider Bake Sale showing up with the following dialogue. Alphys might work faster, but the old royal scientist, Dr. W.D. Gaster? One day he vanished without a trace. They say he shattered across time and space. Haha, how can I say so without fear? I'm holding a piece of him right here. After speaking, this follower will play a strange sound effect and vanish immediately. Fun value 62 will give a 50% chance of a version of the ficus-licking NPC found in the hotel restaurant spawning, who has the following dialogue. It makes sense why Asgore took so long to hire a new royal scientist. After all, the old one, Dr. Gaster, what an act to follow. They say he created the core, however his life was cut short. One day he fell into his creation and, will Alphys end up the same way? Unlike the first follower, this one sticks around until you leave the room, but once you leave and return, they will be absent. The last of these Gaster followers has a 50% chance to spawn when on fun value 63, and interestingly does not resemble any NPC anywhere else in Undertale, but keep them in mind because they will come back later on. This follower says, I understand why Asgore waited so long to hire a new royal scientist. The previous one, Dr. Gaster, his brilliance was irreplaceable. However, his life was cut short. One day his experiments went wrong and, well, I needn't gossip. After all, it's rude to talk about someone who's listening. This NPC also does not disappear until you leave the room. These 3 Gaster followers let us paint a decent picture of who exactly Gaster is. We can deduce that there was a man named W.D. Gaster who used to be Asgore's royal scientist. One of Gaster's notable creations was the core, a device within Hotland that powers the entire underground. One day, an experiment of his resulted in Gaster vanishing, eventually having his position as royal scientist filled by Alphys. What exactly happened to Gaster is not made clear, with all 3 followers only giving vague hints about his fate. One says that he fell into his creation, which could be assumed to be the core based on the other dialogue, though it's not explicitly said to be the core. It's also said that whatever happened to him resulted in Gaster being shattered across time and space, with hints of him still being present in some way. One follower claims to be holding a piece of him right here, while another says it's rude to talk about someone who's listening. Based on this dialogue, it's often speculated that Gaster's fate led to him being wiped from existence, including the memories of the others in the underground, which would play into the meta aspect of Gaster being fake-cut content. It is of course possible that no other characters have cause to mention him, but his total absence from anywhere else in the game certainly sticks out as odd. With the basics of Gaster's character established, we now have the context we need to make sense of the other Gaster-related events hidden throughout Undertale. The first Gaster-related interaction you can find comes before you even start the game, when naming the fallen human. Trying to name yourself after main characters in the story such as Sans, Flowey, Toriel, and so on will give you a line of dialogue from the respective character and not allow you to choose the name. There's also a subset of names such as Caddy, Gerson, Temmie, and more that give dialogue but still let you use the name. If you try to name yourself Gaster, the game will crash as soon as you input the final letter R. Since this is a forbidden name, it could be interpreted that Gaster is a character with a level of importance on par with the other main characters. The next opportunity to come across a piece of Gaster information can occur when at fun value 65 when in Snowdin. After defeating Papyrus, if you backtrack to the room with a save point and a storage box and move upwards to the room with the fishing pole, there's a 50% chance of instead entering the sound test. This room lets you listen to 3 incredibly short looping songs with seemingly no significance. The 4th available track, however, is called Gaster's Theme, and once started cannot be stopped for about 20 seconds, at which point the screen will change to say, "Thanks for your feedback, be seeing you soon," and spit you back out into the expected room. Take a listen. Interestingly, in the files, this song is called muse_st_him.ogg. Knowing Toby Fox's use of leitmotifs in Undertale and Deltarune, it shouldn't surprise you to learn that the motif in this song can seemingly be found in multiple songs across both games. One substantial highlight worth mentioning is in the unused Sans fight theme for Undertale, the song that might play when you fight Sans. You can hear Gaster's theme playing isolated in just your left ear. We will mention a couple other key examples of the Gaster motif's appearance, but unfortunately, the simplicity of Gaster's theme makes it seem to show up everywhere, and it opens up a whole rabbit hole far too deep for this video. But if you're interested in learning more about the Gaster motif and where it might be appearing in Undertale and Deltarune, Andrew Cunningham has a fantastic in-depth analysis of this theme, which will be linked on screen and in the description. It's a fantastic watch, and I highly recommend checking it out. Next up is a much more common interaction with much more subtle and even debatable ties to Gaster. With your fun value between 90 and 100, if you backtrack to the docks in Waterfall, you can come across a grayscale version of Monster Kid, internally called Goner Kid. Speaking to them gives the following dialogue. Have you ever thought about a world where everything is exactly the same, except you don't exist? Everything functions perfectly without you. Haha, the thought terrifies me. Since we don't know Gaster's exact fate, it is difficult to directly tie this to him, but if he was in fact erased from existence like the Gaster followers imply, it could be very fitting. The most notable bit of information that we gain from this event, however, is simply the term Goner referring to these grayscale versions of NPCs. This is something that will be relevant again later on, so keep it in mind. Now for the big one. To understand most of the remaining Gaster tidbits left in Undertale, we finally need to discuss Entry 17, the most important piece of the entire puzzle that is Gaster. In the True Lab segment of the True Pacifist route, there are multiple screens on the wall with numbered journal entries from 1 to 21 left by Alphys. However, the number 17 is skipped over entirely. After some digging in the game code, it was discovered that there is a normally inaccessible room number 264, also known as room_Gaster. If you edit your save file to set your location to this room, the screen will be all black with shaking Wingdings font being printed to the screen while an audio file known only as muse_smile plays in the background. When translated from Wingdings, the message reads, Entry number 17. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photons reading negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? Firstly, with this message in mind, we can deduce that the WD in Gaster's name almost certainly stands for Wingdings, and refers to the font being used to display this message. Secondly, this entry gives us some insight into an experiment conducted by Gaster other than the core, which gives us another candidate for what could have led to the untimely fate described by the Gaster followers. We also get a reference to a certain 2 that would seemingly have some connection to Gaster and his experiments. Entry 17 is by far the most concrete piece of Gaster information we have, and there are many aspects of it to keep in mind. Since this is the only confirmed instance we have of Gaster talking, any references to it are no coincidence, and we will see many components of it return. Keep in mind the audio that plays in the background, as well as key phrases used such as darker yet darker, very, very interesting, and shadows cutting deeper. We will see them again. Speaking of things we'll see again, the largest standout to many at the time was also the phrasing photons reading negative. This puzzled a lot of Undertale players. Photons are the particle form of light, and while you can have no light, such as past the event horizon of a black hole, you can't say that you have negative light in the same way that you can't have negative water in a cup. You could either be empty, full, or somewhere in the middle. Now before any viewers want to comment, but what about antiparticles? Photons actually are their own antiparticles, so you can't even have an antiphoton. Just going by our world's laws of physics, what Gaster says here doesn't make sense, but shortly it might. One other connection we can make with the info from Entry 17 comes from Gaster seemingly being named after a font that they speak in. The only other characters we know that follow this pattern are Sans and Papyrus, which could hint at a connection between the three. There unfortunately isn't much more that we can say about this that doesn't fall into heavy theory territory, but many have used this connection to try to explain the Skeleton Brothers' mysterious appearance in Snowdin, or connect the brothers to the "What do you two think?" line in Entry 17. A small Gaster hint that can actually appear in normal gameplay comes from the river person, who will occasionally say, "Beware the man who speaks in hands." This is almost certainly a reference to Gaster's Wingding font speech, due to the font including many hand symbols as characters. Another small tidbit that is likely Gaster related but technically unconfirmed is the wrong number song. If you go to the river person room in Snowdin with a fun value between 2 and 39, your phone will ring. When you answer, someone will start to speak and ask for someone named G before stopping themselves at only the letter G. They then sing the wrong number song, which we will bring up later in Deltarune. While this phone call isn't necessarily for Gaster, as it could be other G characters like Gerson or Grillby, it's worth noting that Toby Fox specifically did not make this line Japanese in the localization for Undertale in Japan. This was likely done because the mechanics of the Japanese language would mean that localizing the G would force it to also include the first vowel in the name, which would pretty much force Toby's hand in revealing the identity of the person. Next up, we have to discuss the Mystery Man. When you have a fun value of 66, you have a very small chance of encountering something very, very interesting. This fun value is especially significant since Gaster is frequently associated with the number 666 and 6 in general, as a reference to the number commonly associated with the devil. Unused stats in the game's code list all of Gaster's battle stats as a series of 6s, and most of the Gaster follower events are within the 60s range of fun values. The fun value 66 causes an extra hallway to spawn in Waterfall, which has a 10% chance of containing a grayscale door. This adds up to a mere 1 in 1,000 chance of encountering this door naturally. Inside the door is a black and white sprite of a character referred to internally as Mystery Man. When interacting with this man, the sprite changes and he vanishes after playing an ominous sound effect. Due to the rarity, significance of the fun value, and general lack of other information about this encounter, this is commonly thought to be the actual appearance of Dr. Gaster. There is technically one other encounter with a sprite referred to as Redacted that could be Gaster, but I think there is substantial evidence at this point to discount Redacted as canon game content. YouTuber Halfbred Chaos has an in-depth video which we'll link to on screen and in the description on this topic if you're interested in learning more, but I'll briefly summarize it here. Basically, Toby Fox uses a screen called a dog check, which will prevent unintended rooms from loading, and this cannot be bypassed without significant knowledge of the game's inner workings. The room that Redacted is present in uses a dog check, while other unused rooms, such as the Entry 17 room, do not, implying that Redacted is genuine cut content. Based on the similarities between where Redacted's room was intended to be located and where Mystery Man is actually located, the most likely explanation for Redacted is that he was an early iteration of the Mystery Man event that was not fully removed for one reason or another. An interesting note here about Redacted is that he appears to speak in all lowercase wingdings, whereas Gaster speaks exclusively in uppercase wingdings. For Gaster, this represents a pattern we see anywhere else he talks, where the wingdings font can't be used for whatever reason, he will talk entirely in all caps. For Redacted to talk in lowercase wingdings, it might imply that he is a different character, perhaps with a relation to Gaster akin to Sans and Papyrus who follow the font scheme, but it seems like a reach for a character who, as we said, appears to be genuinely cut. Sock Muppet's recent video on Gaster delves into the upper and lowercase wingdings font and how it relates to him among many other crazy details, so definitely check that video out as well. The last piece of information within Undertale that we can tie to Gaster comes from CLAM Girl, an interaction tied to the fun values 80 through 89. CLAM Girl is an NPC that will appear in Waterfall that will tell you about her neighbor's daughter SUZY. When backtracking to CLAM Girl during the epilogue of the True Pacifist route, she mentions that you never got a chance to meet SUZY. This was all there was to this event, up until September of 2018 when Undertale released on the Switch. In this version of the game, if your fun value is exactly 81, talking to CLAM Girl during the epilogue instead has her say, "So you never met my neighbor's daughter, but please don't despair, because the time that you will meet her is fast approaching," where she turns into a goner while speaking to us and disappears with the same ominous sound as Mystery Man. 43 days after the Switch release and the addition of this interaction, Deltarune Chapter 1 released. Additionally, after interacting with CLAM Girl, one interaction in the game changes. A piece of flavor text within Sans' secret workshop in his house in Snowdin. It changes the description of the photo in the drawer to include a note that says "Don't forget," a phrase critically important to Deltarune. We also see that the blueprints in Sans' workshop are written in symbols that cannot be read. A likely interpretation here is that the symbols are wingdings, explaining why the character would be unable to parse the text. And those were all the pieces of the puzzle that we had prior to Deltarune's release. Fortunately for us, Deltarune doesn't hold back on giving us more information, with our first bits coming years before Chapter 1 would even release. We know that Deltarune has been in development as far back as 2012, and Toby Fox has had a website for it far longer than we have even known about the game. Back in December of 2015, only a few months after Undertale's release, Deltarune.com was updated with an image titled him.png. Keep in mind that the song referred to in the sound test as Gaster's theme is internally called him.ogg. When brightened, this image contains Wingding's text quoting part of Entry 17, saying, "This next experiment seems very, very interesting." The website would again be updated in December of 2016 to another image, still titled him.png, containing more Wingding's text that, when brightened, says, "3 heroes appeared to banish the angels' heaven." This was later revealed to be a part of the prophecy told to us by Rousey in Chapter 1 of Deltarune. Although these chronologically happened first, the website itself was not discovered until after the release of Chapter 1 by using the Wayback Machine. Since Deltarune was not known to anyone at the times these images were uploaded, the snapshots of the site were captured manually, presumably by Toby himself. Quick side note, I know we're trying to keep things objective here, but isn't it interesting that both of these site updates happened in the month of December? Anyways, this brings us to the actual release of the game, where on October 30th, 2018, Toby Fox would tweet, "It's cold. It's as if everything had been enveloped in a black wind. You didn't realize it yet, but it seems there's someone who wants to talk to you." Following this tweet, the official Undertale Twitter account would change to an all-black banner and profile picture with a redacted name. This redacted name used black boxes instead of characters, totaling 6 boxes, which would be the correct amount of letters to unredact to Gaster. Then, in a very familiar pattern of speech and quoting some very familiar lines, we got the following series of tweets. "Welcome. Have you been looking for me? How wonderful. I have been looking for you as well. I have something. Something I want to show you. Something I think you will find very, very interesting. But it is not complete yet. No, it is far from complete. Thus, I have a small favor to ask of you. Return here in 24 hours. At that time, I will ask you a few questions. Then, using your responses, we will approach its realization. Thank you very much for your time. I will be in contact again soon." While not in Wingdings, the spacing, tone, and repetition of words from Entry 17 make it incredibly likely that the person speaking to us here is meant to be Gaster. While this is technically not confirmed, it is something that just about everybody agrees on at this point, and for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to refer to this voice as Gaster going forward. As we discussed, his dialogue, even when in Wingdings, is considered uppercase, so it seems like a reasonable assumption. The following day, on Halloween, the tweets from Gaster resumed. "Thank you for waiting so long. After all, you and I, we have both been waiting such a very long time. So to be here, finally, on the verge of connection, is quite exciting. I look forward to creating a new future with you. Now, show yourself, Deltarune." The tweets ended with a link to Deltarune.com with another couple lines from Gaster. "Welcome. Please read these final warnings. Then, take it in your hands." The site contained the download to an executable called survey_program that when ran would give one final bit of relevant text before the actual game begins. You accept everything that will happen from now on. This would install a folder also titled Survey Program that contained Deltarune.exe. Notably, when looking at the details of the original Deltarune application, we can see that the file version is set to 0.6.6.6, which as we know is a number that has been commonly associated with Gaster. This leads to another interesting point. Undertale and Deltarune are both published by the same company started by Toby Fox, Royal Sciences LLC. This is interesting because as we know, Gaster was the royal scientist for Asgore before he fell into his creation. Now we can finally talk about the actual game. The opening sequence of Deltarune continues with Gaster speaking to us, continuing to allude to Entry 17 and referencing the connection he referred to on Twitter. This entire sequence is internally referred to as the Goner Maker. It involves creating a grayscale human incredibly reminiscent of the Gaster followers from Undertale. Each of the parts of the vessel we can create here are internally named image_Goner head, image Goner body, or image Goner legs. This naming scheme is very different from the typical naming scheme of files in the game, almost like they were intentionally named to stand out and be distinct from other files of the game, as well as match Gaster's all-caps speech pattern. This naming scheme reappears in a few other places and will be brought up later. The song playing in the background during this sequence is called Another Hymn, and while I know we said we wouldn't be touching the Gaster motif much, this song very openly contains it, and since its title references him.ogg, I feel confident enough just saying that. Just like Undertale, when prompted to enter a name for either the vessel or creator, entering Gaster will reset the game. If you visit the game menu early in Chapter 1, the save file menu will appear very differently, all in black and green, reminiscent of a stereotypical computer command line interface. When doing actions in this version of the save file menu, we receive dialogue in all capital letters, seemingly Gaster himself once again, describing our actions in his trademark ominous ways. Some examples of the dialogue are, "It conformed to the reflection when copying a save file," or "It was as if it was never there at all when erasing one." Chapter 1 plays out as normal, with nothing particularly standing out until much later in the chapter, starting with Jevil. Jevil is generally a weird guy, but the really interesting stuff comes after we defeat him and return to talk with Sham in their shop. Sham tells us that themselves and Jevil used to be acquaintances, and they would possibly even call Jevil a friend. One day, Jevil met a strange person who told him something, and afterwards, Jevil began believing that the world was a game and generally started his downward spiral. What makes this very interesting is that Sham says Jevil's words have stuck with them, making their view of the world become darker, yet another direct quote from Entry 17. The Dark World portion of the chapter concludes as expected, but we get a couple more pieces of Gaster during the hometown segment at the end of the game. At the bottom of the town is a bunker that when approached cuts out the usual music and starts to play a strange sound effect. If we speed up this sound by exactly 666%, we find that this is actually a slowed down version of Muse_smile, the same sound that plays during Entry 17. One other potential connection we have is the appearance of this bird-like NPC found in the library. This character is clearly the standard version of one of the Gaster followers from Undertale, the only one that did not have a normal version in that game. The dialogue isn't anything interesting in this chapter, but this guy does get more interesting as time goes on, so we will revisit them. It then took another 3 years of waiting until September 17th, 2021, when following an announcement on a Fangamer livestream for the Undertale anniversary, we got another series of Gaster tweets leading up to Chapter 2's release on the same day. How long it has been. Once more, I thank you for your patience in these difficult times. You have done excellently to persevere. Deltarune glows brightly from your hope. Now, shall we? Shall we go again? The second field, the second connection, and a link to Deltarune.com. After bringing the objects from the classroom to the closet at the beginning of the chapter, there is a Rudin in front of the dojo that specifically references the name that you gave yourself during the Goner Maker sequence in Chapter 1. They welcome you to Player Name Town and say, or so I heard it's called. This is the only time as of yet that any of the choices from the opening sequences have been referenced, and this Rudin will continue to have interesting dialogue as the chapters go on. Similar to Jevil, the secret boss of Chapter 2, Spampton, is once again very bizarre. Spampton has far more dialogue than Jevil, with a lot of things that make for excellent theory crafting, but once again, nothing damning comes until after Spampton Neo's defeat. If you return to Spampton's shop in the dump, a group of Addisons are lined up outside, which when spoken to, tell us how Spampton came to be the way he is. Spampton was once just like the other Addisons, though he had far less success than the others. Spampton was desperate to become a big shot, and eventually began contacting someone over the phone who began to help him, leading to massive success. He even moved into Queen's Mansion. Spampton continued to grow, leaving the other Addisons behind until one day his success abruptly stopped, leading to Spampton being evicted from the mansion. One of the Addisons went to check on him and found his phone hanging off the hook, with Spampton having left in the middle of a conversation. When listening to the other line, the Addison describes hearing nothing but garbage noise. This is especially interesting, because when you attempt to use Chris's cell phone in the Dark World, it plays Muse_smile from Entry 17, and describes the sound as nothing but garbage noise. This of course gives us a very interesting candidate for who the strange man that spoke with both Jevil and Spampton might be. Once the chapter concludes, we can find that the bird NPC has moved to the upstairs of the library and continues talking about reading the books upstairs, 2 of which we can now access, which pertain to humans and monster souls. If you speak to them again, their speech pattern becomes just a little bit stranger and more unnatural sounding. If you go to the lake at the top of the town and you had not spoken with Onion-san in Chapter 1, the Clam Girl NPC from Undertale will be sitting there. When you talk to them, they open up and their sprite switches to Clam Guy, where they tell you that something happened yesterday when they stood on the circle in front of the lake. This basically just seems to be a way to inform the player that they missed content in Chapter 1, and there really isn't anything too interesting said here, but the NPC being Clam Girl, the goner with the most directly relevant to Deltarune dialogue, makes it worth noting. If we revisit the bunker at the bottom of town, we find Snowdrake and Monster Kid in the middle of a conversation discussing some kind of rumor about the bunker. We don't get many specifics, but we do hear Chris's name mentioned, potentially tying them to some rumor or past event that occurred nearby or within the bunker. Since the bunker continues to play the slowed down version of Mew's Smile, any events tied to the bunker are worth keeping in mind. That concludes Chapter 2 and kicks off the nearly 4-year wait for our most recent release of Chapters 3 and 4 on June 4th, 2025. There's a whole bunch of exciting stuff to talk about here, but before jumping back into the game, we have yet another set of Gaster tweets that dropped in the minutes leading up to the chapter's release. How long it has been, and yet, no matter how much time passes, it still trembles. Our beautiful connection. I can feel it, quickening now. How lucky we are to need each other in this way. So then, will you partake once more? The 3rd episode, the 4th fate, and yet another link to Deltarune.com. Towards the beginning of Chapter 3, we get a monologue from Rousey where he refers to the very concept that Dark Worlds are based on, being the world becoming darker than dark. I know I promised we wouldn't talk about Gaster's theme, and I swear this is the last time, but the song playing during this monologue isn't even subtle about it. The fact that this song's title is Flashback Excerpt has me very interested in what context the full version of the song could play. The explanation we receive here for the creation of a dark world also seems to call back to that one strange line from entry 17, photon readings negative. Negative photons would imply taking light away from an already dark place, making it darker than dark. This makes it very likely that the experiment that entry 17 is referring to is tied to a dark world in some way. The chapter proceeds mostly as normal, although there is certainly room to read into the Gaster-esque game-breaking glitchiness of the Sword Route games and how the final location of the games is the bunker in Hometown. There really isn't much concrete to say here though, so I'll leave it at that. Our next real concrete connection comes from Chapter 3's Egg Room. I know we haven't talked about the Egg Rooms and the Forgotten Man, but there is a good reason for that, and I promise we will discuss him later. However, it is quickly worth noting that in Chapter 3's Egg Room, there are a couple Rudens that have some interesting dialogue, where one asks us to photocopy a Chris, and another who states that copies are monochrome. This seems like a very explicit reference to the vessel that we create at the start of Chapter 1. It opens the door for lots of speculation on what the Goners and Gaster followers' grayscale appearance could actually mean. Our next possible connections come from the final battle of Chapter 3, the Roaring Night. For starters, the Roaring Night has a color palette of strictly black and white, a palette that we really haven't seen on any other character sprites other than the presumably Gaster Mystery Man sprite from Undertale. This next point steps a little bit into fanon territory, but it's too big to not point out. For years, the common fan interpretation of the Mystery Man sprite has been interpreted with those white circles with black dots in the middle as hands with stigmata-like holes in them. This has pretty much become the default appearance of Gaster online, and given Toby Fox's involvement with the online community, he's undoubtedly aware of this. The Roaring Night has holes in their hands. There's no other way to interpret this sprite. Toby absolutely knew this connection would be drawn, but whether it was to mess with theorists, a genuine and authentic connection, or a design element that Toby adopted from the community is admittedly up for debate. Depending on how you view it, this could mean absolutely nothing, or it could be the single biggest Gaster connection we have received thus far. The actual fight with the Knight also connects to Gaster by being the only fight to have special dialogue from Gaster when losing the fight. If you return to the fight after completing Chapter 3, instead of progressing the story, your first defeat to the Knight will give you the following dialogue on the Game Over screen. Very interesting. Your loss here is all but guaranteed. And yet you persist. If you are so determined to try once more, then shall we hasten? Every defeat beyond the first will instead give the following dialogue. And so, you meet with the same fate. Shall you try once more? If you are attempting to fight the Knight without the Shadow Mantle, you will get additional unique dialogue. Very interesting. You are missing something important. You won't win like this. Still, will you persist? The Knight fight provides us with one last set of Gaster dialogue if you die during the Knight's final attack, offering a bit more encouragement. Incredible. I felt it there, shining. Your power. A little further. After grabbing Undyne, the knight retreats into the light world and enters a dark fountain within the bunker at the bottom of Hometown, officially bringing the Gaster sound emitting location into the forefront of the story. After Suzy leaves, we see the bunker door open, further hinting at the undeniable alliance between Chris and the knight, and directly tying Chris to whatever is going on inside the bunker. Chapter 3 concludes, and Chapter 4 doesn't take long to hit us with yet another direct quote from Entry 17, this time with a religious hymn sung in Hometown's church service about the prophecy containing the phrase, "Shadows cutting deep." The Rudin within our castle town that has previously referred to our town using the creator name we gave during the Goner Maker sequence does so again, although they are now blue instead of green, and upon repeated interaction they have even more interesting dialogue. They acknowledge that they look different and say, "Sorry, I'm just me. My color must have faded. Pay it no mind." Fading color certainly brings to mind the Goners, and this particular Rudin's knowledge of the Goner Maker sequence definitely makes it seem like we should be keeping a close eye on him in future chapters. We can again find the bird-like NPC in the upper level of the library, having moved back, allowing us access to another bookshelf with a book about monster burial rituals. This reveals an interesting pattern with the bird-like NPC. He's slowly revealing bookshelves to us, and each bookshelf shows us a book somewhat relevant to the chapter's events. And behind him sits 3 more shelves, aligning very well with the likely chapter amount of 7. Speaking to the NPC results in even stranger dialogue than before, with them constantly telling us to wait. This same NPC can be found again if you go to the lake and attempt to wait for Onion-san. After Suzy tells you that Onion-san isn't coming, you can leave and re-enter the area, at which point the bird will be standing in front of the lake. When talking to them, they spout more unnatural dialogue saying "don't wait" multiple times. During the segment in Noelle's house where the soul is separated from Chris, we have to go through the vents and enter the basement to progress the story. Oddly, when in the basement, the music cuts out and plays the same slowed down version of Mew's Smile that plays outside of the bunker. This continues until you progress the story by interacting with the fuse box. Another quick note is the return of the Wrong Number song, an event possibly tied to Gaster and Undertale. Here, when Birdly calls Noelle and Chris answers the phone, Chris can sing the Wrong Number song to Birdly. From this point on, the chapter plays out fairly standard until the end, though it is worth briefly mentioning the secret boss of Chapter 4, Gerson. Gerson is not driven mad in the same way that the other secret bosses have been, and this seems to be a direct result of action taken by Gerson. After his fight, Gerson gives us a shadow crystal and states that it felt like someone really wanted me to use this thing, but it didn't interest me, so you can take it. This seems to imply that whatever mysterious man caused Jevil and Spamton to become so crazy also attempted to give Gerson the same deal, but Gerson turned it down. Chapter 4's Dark World culminates in an encounter with the Knight where they open a dark fountain inside the Dark World and summon a Titan. This is a very out there connection, and I truthfully do not think it's intentional, but for the sake of compiling absolutely everything, if you squint your eyes at the Titan, it looks an awful lot like the face of the Mystery Man sprite. With the silhouette of the Titan's first appearance also very strangely resembling a human face before unraveling into what we fully see, there are certainly a lot of theories to be made here. At this point, the game wraps up as normal, until the end credits where we get our first in-game conversation with the Gaster-like narrator outside of a game over screen since the opening sequence of Chapter 1. This conversation ushers us into the next period of waiting until 2026 with the following message. Well done, the halfway mark has been attained. But it is still waiting. How much longer now? My Deltarune. Interestingly, this is not the only version of the ending dialogue. On the PlayStation version of Deltarune, Toby was required to add trophies for accomplishing various tasks. The trophies and their descriptions follow the same text pattern as Gaster, being in all caps and having strange-sounding names. Many of these can be obtained in multiple ways, such as Mirror, Observe the Duplicate, being able to be unlocked by interacting with the mirror in the Dreamer home or copying a save file. Sword, Equip a Weapon, can be unlocked by equipping a weapon in the Dark World or by starting the Sword route secret games. In short, the trophies are weird and very difficult to avoid without obscure gameplay routes meant purposefully to avoid them. If you complete all 4 chapters and reach the end without unlocking any trophies at all, you will instead get the following Gaster dialogue where Gaster calls you by the name you enter during the opening sequence. Big shout out here to Faz. He was the first person to find this and definitely the first person to get footage of it. So when you see the name Faz, just pretend that that was the name you put for the vessel creator in Chapter 1. The dialogue we get instead is, "Interesting. You failed to achieve any marks. What are you? Faz. I very much look forward to the next." While on the topic of this white menu text, the code in Deltarune explicitly defines this text as glowing. This glowing text is only used for these Gaster text sequences. Why this is worth mentioning is that the organic enemy in Chapter 4 give various dialogue about the prophecy in their combat quotes. One specific quote is, "It was glowing. The voice was glowing." If we combine this with the interesting glowing text descriptive we see, it seems to throw yet another drop into the ocean of Gaster wrote the prophecy evidence. And that brings us to the end of Chapters 3 and 4. Before jumping into a bit of discussion on the importance of Gaster, there are a few things I would like to bring up as possible or more indirect references to Gaster. First up is the egg rooms. Each chapter has a hidden room where an unseen man behind a tree gives you an egg. In the first 2 chapters, these rooms were pretty bare bones, and due to their hidden and mysterious nature, they stirred up a lot of speculation towards possibly being connected to Gaster. The rooms can only appear by going back and forth between 2 other areas until you trigger them by chance, a very one-to-one parallel with how Gaster's room is made to appear in Undertale. However, Chapter 3's egg room is a far more involved process and actually lets us speak to the man behind the tree. This room includes the Rudens mentioned earlier who do have dialogue that seems to connect to Goners, but the actual man behind the tree reveals himself to be called the Forgotten Man and generally has a manner of speech very distinct from what we have seen with Gaster. The Chapter 4 egg room is also a little more involved and provides us with a more concrete direction for where the egg room and tree plotline is going, rather than just being about a mysterious man. With that said, there is certainly some sort of connection between the Forgotten Man and Gaster, since the egg rooms contain dialogue that seems to reference things tied directly to Gaster. In addition, 4 of the trophies in the PlayStation version of the game refer to completing each chapter without issue. The only way to avoid unlocking these trophies is by getting the egg before completing the chapter, which implies that these eggs are somehow an issue for Gaster, who has written the trophies. This means that the only way to genuinely throw off Gaster and get that PlayStation exclusive dialogue, considering he still gives trophies out in the weird route, is to get the eggs and keep them. The Forgotten Man is certainly a character to keep a close eye on for Gaster connections, but at this point it seems safe to say that he is not Gaster himself, or at least not the version of him that we have been introduced to thus far. I want to keep this video as objective as possible, and saying any more would dive into heavy theory territory, so I'll leave it at that. The next possible Gaster-connected entity is Friend. Friend refers to this sprite of a smiling face with pink and yellow eyes that has been seen in a couple places throughout the game. We first saw this face in the basement of Queen's Mansion during the Spampton questline, but it has since appeared in the Spampton sweepstakes, the Dark World monologue at the start of Chapter 3, the Sword Route game, the ERAM boss fight, the Mike fight, Cat Petters minigame, and within the Chapter 4 Dark World. Friend gets its name from the internal file name for the image, which is called device_friend and image_friend in all caps. This naming scheme is interesting because it follows the unique naming scheme given to all components of the Goner Maker sequence, which seem to be an explicit creation of Gaster, as well as copying his speech quirk with all capital letters. There is also good reason to believe that Friend is tied to the Tale of Hell mentioned in the prophecy. Friend is a rabbit hole worthy of their own video, but to quickly cliff notes why they might be tied to Gaster, Friend is named in a way that only Gaster-related objects are named. Friend appears often in connection with Spampton, who was seemingly influenced by Gaster, with his glasses colors seeming to mimic Friend. In Chapter 3, we see many instances of Friend in the Sword Route, but especially during the ERAM boss fight, which takes place within a virtual version of the hometown bunker. If you want to dive deeper into the topic of Friend, Spooky Dude has a great video covering everything we know about Friend, and presents a pretty solid theory on their potential role in the story that I mostly agree with. It will be linked on screen and in the description of this video if you'd like to check it out. The last thing I want to discuss are the unused text strings within the files of each chapter. These are bits of dialogue that are placed within a function titled unused, and while not used in-game, were very clearly never meant to be, and were just intended to be found by digging into the game code. This was also initially brought up in Gaster conversations due to its nature of being hidden within the game's code, but once again, the speech patterns certainly do not match up with Gaster. The more common theory now is that this could be Des, which if you subscribe to the theory that Des is the knight, could tie this to Gaster as well. There isn't much else to say with this, but I felt I at least had to bring it up. Well, there we have it. Every reference and potential connection to WD Gaster across all of Undertale and the first 4 chapters of Deltarune. This video took a long while to research to make sure I had everything, and I think we got it all, but be sure to let us know if we missed something important and we'll add it to the video description. While we were working on this video, the level of involvement that Gaster might have in Deltarune's overall story has started to become a bit of a hot topic in the Deltarune community, so I quickly want to weigh in on the matter. I personally think that Gaster already is and will continue to be an incredibly important part of Deltarune, likely being a large part of the endgame story. After chapters 3 and 4, my confidence in Gaster's relevancy has grown stronger than ever before, with some pieces of evidence towing the line of undeniable in my mind. In all honesty, it somewhat baffles me how people can know that the Deltarune website was deliberately captured years ahead of release with segments of Entry 17 and the Prophecy and Wingdings, then have the game open with the man himself speaking to us personally, and still think that he will not play a key role in the overall meta-narrative of Deltarune's story. To me, it couldn't be clearer that Gaster is the author of the prophecy, and with Chapter 4 starting us down the route of rising above and defying said prophecy, it seems a confrontation later in the game is unavoidable. A large part of the reason we made this video was to ensure the context of Gaster was consolidated somewhere to act as a resource for our own theories as well as any theories that might come from the community. With that said, we are in the process of cooking up our own Gaster Theory video to connect these pieces and share our take on where we think his plotline is going. We really want to do this one right, so it may be a bit before it releases, but definitely keep an eye out for that part 2 in the near future. Once again, thanks to everyone for the great reception on these Deltarune videos. Expect plenty more content like this in the future, and you can subscribe if you want to keep up with our content. Thank you all for watching, and thanks to our awesome patrons. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.